She wasn't defying me. She's struggling right now. This is the best she can do. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. This behavior is information. If I had thought something like that, I would have looked at the whole situation differently and I would have approached it differently. Welcome to the Connect Method Parenting Podcast, where correction is out, connection is in, and your kids want to listen to you. I'm Andy Martineau, creator of Connect Method Parenting, here to help you stay calm, confident, and connected no matter what. Hey, everybody. How are you? Today, it's October 3rd. It marks the 1-year mark of the Connect Method Parenting Podcast. I'm so excited. I am so glad that you're here with me today celebrating, because it's a pretty big deal for us to hit the 1-year mark. Episode 84, which I know is a totally random number, but that's the episode today. And I'm calling it Drama at the Train Station, Finding and Owning Your Own Thoughts and Messes. I'm getting real and raw today. This is a real experience that happened last week when we were transitioning from a train in Berlin. We had come from Amsterdam. We're going to Prague. I'm going to talk more about it. If you're wondering why am I in Europe? Yes, we are in Europe right now. And I'm recording this from Barcelona actually today. It's beautiful here. Highly recommend Barcelona. We are doing a 6-month international study abroad with my girls. So number 5 and 6 are 16 and 17. And then my 22-year-old is also along for the ride. Then my 3 girls are here. My boys are elsewhere. 2 are in Chile. 1's back at the house taking care of the dog and holding down the fort and going to college. But here we are. Yes. And I'm going to break it all down, why we're here, explain it all later. It's a really cool story. It's taken 3 years to make this happen. Well, more than that, but 3 years is when it really started happening. So here we are. We're in this new terrain. And because of all of this newness, my nervous system is adjusting. So it's giving me some really great stories to talk about today. And after the drama at the train station happened, I thought this would be a great thing to crack wide open on the podcast, to be honest and real about my humanity, my nervous system, what happens when we go into new situations, if that's a new age for our child, a new house, a new job, a new time of life, a new whatever. Something happens, something changes, and our nervous system has to adjust. So my nervous system is adjusting and giving me some great stories that I get to share with you all on the podcast. So we're going to dive into that. And it's kind of a funny episode to share on the 1-year anniversary, but also a real episode, authentic, messy. Hey, this is me. I'm not perfect. You don't have to be perfect either. It's about progress, not perfection. So we're going to dive into that in just a second. But I want to remind you really quickly that applications for the final round of the pivot, this is the last pivot we're going to be doing this year. It ends on Saturday, meaning applications will close at midnight Pacific time, US Pacific time on Saturday, because it takes us a little bit to review them. And we are kicking this off on that Monday, the 7th. This will be the last pivot we do this year. So if you want to jump in before 2025, this is your time to do it. If you want to take the information we talk about each week on the podcast and infuse it into your parenting, have it change your life, you're going to want to jump into this 8-week parenting pivot. If you have joined us in a previous pivot, just know how grateful I am and thankful I am for you. It's helping us create the evidence to show the tangible results that happen with Connect Method Parenting on families and relationships and nervous systems and lives. So thank you so much. If you've done a pivot before and you want to jump in again, message us. We will get you back in and you can repeat it. We're making plans for what this pivot is going to look like moving forward in 2025, and we're always improving it. What I do know is that this last pivot of 2024 is going to be the most amazing pivot we've done all year. We have made some tweaks and some changes that I'm very, very excited about. So get your applications in by the 5th. We'll see if you qualify, and hopefully I'll see you on the 7th. Okay. I just recently went through an experience, like I was telling you guys, that I think will really help you understand what the heck our nervous system is doing. And I know even though your experience might be different, the context that your nervous system might freak out inside of might be different. The concept is the same. So I'm going to explain a situation that for my nervous system felt unsafe, felt unfamiliar, and initiated a takeover / fight or flight experience, safety in my nervous system. Now, even though yours might not be happening at a train station in Berlin with your children there, yours might be happening because your child turned 10 or is going to kindergarten, or your teenager is driving, or now you have to figure out the phone stuff because your kids are getting older and technology is an issue, or you've moved houses, whatever that scenario is, that container is, we all have situations in our life that are different, that we haven't become accustomed to, that we haven't run so many steers and pieces on, which are the tools we teach in League that I highly recommend. Go back to the first couple of episodes if you haven't worked with me in League and refamiliarize yourself with those tools. I also talk about them in the book. But knowing our own nervous system, this is strategy 1 in Connect Method Parenting. Understand your own behavior so you can leave room for your children's behavior. We have to go back to that first strategy when we are up against something new, because our nervous system is going to potentially respond in a way that is not consistent with how it has been responding. I get this a lot. Moms will come on an office hours call with me in League and say, "You do not understand, Andy. I've been doing so good and now I'm backsliding." And I would say 9 times out of 10, and it's probably higher than that, but I'm just going to go with 9 times out of 10 because that's super safe. 9 times out of 10, when we dig in, something has shifted in their life with their kids, something, and their nervous system is having to recalibrate, readapt. And so it's not a backsliding, it's a readjustment. And what I love to point out, and I'm going to point it out for myself in my situation as I dive into it, is the person you are being as you recalibrate and readjust to this new situation is such an elevated version of yourself when you've been doing Connect Method Parenting consistently, because you're able to bring all of those neural pathways that you've been forming and using in other situations and had huge breakthroughs and things are going smoother in those other situations. You're able to bring it to this new situation. And even though at first it might feel as though you're backsliding, what's really happening is you are creating new neural pathways, showing your nervous system, hey, this situation is also safe. And you're coming at it at such a higher level that even though it might be hard for you to see, you're learning and adapting faster. You're recovering faster. You're learning and growing from the experiences in a way that wasn't accessible for you before. And even though you might say, well, I was impatient or I lost my cool again, the awareness you have around that and the ability to up-level yourself, even just by looking at it without getting triggered, is so different. So let's dive into what happened, how I recently got so triggered and my nervous system really did have a takeover / freak out. There's no better way to say it than I freaked out with someone I care deeply about. So let me set the stage. We're at this train station in Berlin and my youngest went off on her own. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast, the last few episodes, you've heard me talk about how my nervous system is getting used to my kids being safe or perceiving them as safe in countries, cultures that are not familiar to me. And it's been a crazy, surprising thing that my nervous system has presented for me. I've been working on my nervous system to calm it down and to stop thinking that my kids are going to get kidnapped, but it keeps popping up. And so I keep being able to look at it. And we're at this train station and we don't speak the language. We had 20 minutes before our connecting train and I was unfamiliar with how the system worked. So we were getting on another train. It was going to be a 4-hour train ride, I believe 4 or 5 hour train ride. And I wasn't sure how early we needed to arrive. I wasn't sure where the platform was we needed to get to. The kids were hungry. I was really out of my element using trains and didn't speak German, even though my maiden name is Schneff. Yes, Schneff, Schnepf, clearly German. I did take 2 years of German in high school and I don't remember hardly anything other than Dankeschön, bitte. I mean, there's a few very basic phrases, but I really fell out of my element. And I had been telling my girls previous to this, at least this was my memory, was not to go anywhere without a buddy, without a partner. I needed them to go in groups of 2. It felt safer to me. And so that had been what I thought I had communicated really clearly. So the girls go off. There were, 3, 4 of them go off because I have 3 of my girls on this trip. I have one bonus. She's awesome. So bonus girl with us. And so there were 4 of them. So they went off on their own to get some food. They wanted to make sure we had food for this long train ride, which makes sense because we had been traveling 6 hours by this point, maybe 7 from when we left our last place, door to door. So they were hungry and they weren't sure what kind of food would be on the train. So all of this makes total sense. But they come back and Becca's missing. my youngest, my 16-year-old's missing. So what had happened is they had walked to an escalator because it was multiple levels that they wanted to go up. And the escalator was broken. So then they went and waited at the elevator, and the elevator was taking forever. So Becca just took off and walked up the escalator, even though it wasn't working, just like a flight of stairs. And the other girls came back to let us know that they couldn't get up on their own and they were going to take the elevator, and Becca was missing. And my sympathetic nervous system did a full-on takeover. I could feel my body switch. I went into fight or flight mode. I was legitimately scared and wanted to find her. I was simultaneously, this is called mixed emotions. So I was feeling multiple emotions at one time. I was mad at her sisters for letting her go off alone. Mad might not be the right word, but I was upset at them. I was upset. I'm like, come on, we're watching out for each other. Everyone knows the rule. I was nervous and mad and upset and feeling frustrated with Becca all at the same time, because in my head, my thought was she's not respecting my rule of twos. So this is all swirling in my head. And I'm also feeling so much compassion and empathy. I'm feeling concern and just a whole gamut of emotions. So we catch the elevator. It takes forever. We get up to the floor where supposedly she was walking to on her own, and I don't see her. So then my body freaks out again, which is totally illogical and logical all at the same time. Do you see the truths there? Logical, because if my nervous system has a story that my children are going to get abducted, even if it's been a minor story for a long time, now it's becoming main character because my brain is remembering movies of kids getting abducted in foreign lands, just crazy stuff. But it's there, and I need to realize this is a story that is valid to part of my nervous system. So in some way, totally valid, and I understand why logically that would make sense to that illogical part of my brain. And also from my higher thinking, completely illogical, because I'm realizing the chances of her getting abducted in 2 minutes is very low. It's not as if someone's stalking us. No one's wanted. No one's been working for, some undercover organization that is on the lookout to steal my children. So totally illogical. Chances are very low. I've not heard of this being a problem in Berlin, people getting abducted at train stations when their family is right there. But part of me was scared, and part of me was upset, and part of me was understanding myself. So all these mixed emotions, they were trying to temper each other. But my separation triggered pursuit emotion, my frustration emotion, my alarm, those are the primal emotions that drive us to togetherness, which togetherness is the essence of survival. So those all got triggered. And then all of this is happening inside of me. And then we see her, and she's walking towards us. And at this point, now that there's a little bit of relief that she's safe, I physically see her. I go into a takeover again, because my brain is saying we need to stay together to survive. We need togetherness. We need proximity. And the frustration kicks in. The frustration that gets triggered when we're facing separation, it's pretty fierce. It's pretty foul. And frustration is there to change a situation that needs to be changed, to create more togetherness, more safety in that relationship. So that kicks in because the pursuit has now been solved. She's coming. We got the proximity back, and the alarm part, which is the moves me to caution, that's quelling, and the frustration, that foul frustration, just kicks into high gear. And so instead of saying in this kind, compassionate way, which I would love to say if I had been able to stay in my highest thinking brain and stayed in that compassionate part, which wasn't accessible to me in the moment because I was learning to adapt to something new, and I hadn't done the work in this situation to show up the way I wanted to. So what I wish I would have said is, "Oh, Becca, I was so worried about you. I'm so glad we're all together." I could have said that and been done with it and then revisited the groups of 2 rule later, but I didn't. I didn't say that. My thought was Becca is ignoring my requests to stay in groups of 2, and I've got to lay down the law to keep her safe, which I did, and I'm not proud of it. I don't like how it came out. So instead of, "Oh, Becca, I was so worried about you. I'm so glad we're together," which would have indicated that my prefrontal cortex was still on, my emotions were tempering each other, I was able to stay in that compassionate place, which is the goal. And I can stay there in so many situations that are familiar to me, but this situation was anything but familiar to me, and it triggered some core concerns. I remember as a kid thinking I was going to get kidnapped, watching movies where kids must have gotten kidnapped or separated from their parents and being really alarmed by it. So it was tapping into that really base fear of mine. So of course I don't say the kind, loving thing that in hindsight would have been amazing to say. I say, Becca, if you do this again, you're going to get on a plane. You're going to fly back to Nana. That's my mom's house. You're going to fly back to Nana's house and you're going to stay there until we get home. And I'm literally watching myself say this and thinking, Andy, are you for real? Why are you saying it like this? This is not going to help her want to listen to you. It's not building trust. It's eroding the relationship. You're clearly not connected. But in these moments, if you've had one like this, which maybe you haven't, maybe it's just me, but if you've had a moment where you can see yourself reacting in a way that's completely at odds with how you want to be, it's almost as if you've been possessed by this foul frustration and these words are coming out, which in a way your nervous system is doing a takeover. And I'm looking at myself saying this, knowing I don't want to say this, but not stopping myself, not being able to stop myself in the moment. That was the best I could do. Becca then starts crying and she said, Mom, I didn't even know about the group rule of twos. Like we had to stay in groups of two. And I was so dysregulated that I couldn't hear that truth. I didn't believe her in the moment. I turned around, which is so ridiculous. Like we're all standing there, my husband, the 4 girls, me, and I say this little bit in a corrective, unkind way. I'm not proud of this at all, but I say this little thing and then I turn my back and I walk down the escalator to the platform. I did want to get to the platform because we were getting closer and closer to the departure time. I think we were 10 minutes out at this point. And so I was feeling also this need to get to the platform, get on the train, not miss that. So I turn around and I walk down the escalator and can you say crazy emotional takeover? Crazy. I expressed my frustration in this way that I'm not proud of at all. And I tend to say things that I regret when I'm in a takeover. And this is a great example of me acting from a place of negative emotions. I immediately disagreed with the way I had just acted. As my emotions subsided, my prefrontal cortex was able to get back in control of my body. At least that's what it felt like. I said to myself, what in the world? What just happened? Why did you freak out to that extent? And even though I understood the fear and I came by it honestly, even though I knew it was unreasonable and I was so sorry for how I responded to that, and I knew I needed to address it, I needed to let her know she needed to stay in groups of 2. I knew that the way I had done it wasn't the way I wanted to do it. This is all happening in my brain. I'm starting to unwind it and say, what in the world just exploded out of your mouth back there? As I'm taking the escalator down, I'm standing on the platform, we're getting on the train. So this is a 10-minute process of me really getting honest with myself, self-confronting in a way that I'm taking 100% responsibility and looking at the situation and realizing this was all created by me. So before I even get on the train, Becca comes down and I tell her immediately, hey, I completely disagree with how I just reacted to you. It wasn't okay. I didn't realize I wasn't clear about the groups of 2 rule and I'm so sorry. So I was able to say that to her right there. And she just cried and she got mad at me, which makes complete sense. She's completely valid in getting mad at me. And she did cry and we hugged and I said sorry a few more times on the train and I kept processing what had happened for me. I was trying to learn from it. I was trying to understand where this fear was coming from. And we had 4 or 5 hours on the train. So I just used that time to process. And watching myself get scared, replaying the situation, looking at the stories and beliefs and fears and emotions that came up when I couldn't find her for a few minutes, feeling the separation triggered pursuit to find her, and then seeing as we found her getting angry and defended and reacting disproportionately what was needed to the event, setting a limit with too much emotion and not enough compassion and connection, reacting to the situation in a way that I did not approve of, I do not condone. And it made so much sense from the nervous system's point of view and almost no sense from my higher thinking. And when I say nervous system, I should say the sympathetic nervous system's point of view. It made no sense from the parasympathetic point of view. So new situation, lots of people reading and hearing things about people getting abducted, kidnapped, all allowed me to have the understanding that I needed to come to peace with how my sympathetic nervous system reacted. However, as I was sitting on the train, it became clearer and clearer to me the fundamental truth we talk about all of the time on the podcast, that thinking that anything outside of us is causing our emotional reaction and that we don't have control over it isn't accurate. And also, as clear as day was the fact that my heightened, disproportionately needed reaction to the situation did not help anything. It didn't solve anything. The threat that I'd send her back to her grandma's didn't help. My irrational behavior, the way I said the words I said that distanced us in our relationship in the moment, all of those things were not going to ever create the resolution I wanted, clear as day. And what's fascinating is there's so many situations where I used to react in this heightened way when the kids had made a mess. You've heard me talk about the baby powder blizzard. Great example of how that used to play out in my life. That was an awesome situation though, because that in a similar way to what I'm describing today, I reacted and then was able to pivot and see it differently. In that case, it was in the moment. With the train station situation, it wasn't exactly in the moment, but it was shortly thereafter I was able to really get clarity on what had happened. So there's these situations that the messes, the kids talking back, not getting homework done, bedtime, all of these situations that I had encountered thousands of times in my home, I've gotten very comfortable with, and my nervous system reacts in a really predictable, calm way. I stay in parasympathetic. I'm not overreacting, but this new situation was the perfect environment for my nervous system to say, hey, let's see if we can get her to water some of these old stories. Let's bring up some old fears. And so this is what's going to happen in your life too. You're going to be doing so well in a certain area or with a certain situation or with a certain child, and then something will switch and you'll have to learn how to calm your nervous system down in this situation. But you're coming with such fantastic tools and new neural pathways and a track record, it will be easier. So when I got mad at her, when I told her in my head, I didn't say this out loud, but when I told myself that she was wrong, it didn't serve me. That probably didn't serve anyone on the planet. It wasn't my full capacity. It was the best I could do in that moment, but it wasn't my full capacity. It was much lower. It wasn't very kind. And the problem was that I was so caught up in my own drama. I was so wrapped up in my own thinking that I wanted to be right, and being right was more important than being compassionate, than being understanding. I didn't want to take the time or have the discipline that I needed to not say anything in the moment, to really do my own work on it before I had the conversation with her. If when I had seen her walking back to me and I could feel all of the big emotions taking over, if in that moment I had been able to say, whoa, this is a lot going on in here right now. I'm just going to do no harm. I'm just going to pivot. I'm just going to be quiet and talk about this in 10 minutes, in 10 hours when I'm ready to, whatever that period of time is. That would have been much more beneficial. But I didn't do that. I didn't want to take responsibility. I was so nervous and so scared. And sometimes that's how it is. Just takes over. And that's the best we can do in that moment. And so I let it out. There's so many facts that I could write out and lay out for you all that helps me not beat myself up over this situation, that instead helps me feel clarity around why it happened and learn and grow from it. And by me saying that, I'm not saying, hey, Andy, you don't need to take responsibility for it. No, I actually take more responsibility for it when I see the truth of what led up to this moment. We had gotten up very early in a foreign country, in a train station. And this train station, I don't know if any of you have been to the Berlin, I think it's their main train station. It's, I think, 6 stories tall. Multiple escalators going down. It's enormous. It's the biggest train station I've ever been to. Very modern and very scary to my nervous system. I don't know. It looks just like the pictures. It looks just like the movies where someone gets taken. So I don't know, all the things that got me to this place where I reacted in a way that was completely ridiculous. So in that moment, I just wanted to blame and justify how I was feeling. I wanted to tell my daughter, it was her fault for her going off on her own. If she hadn't gone off on her own, I wouldn't have felt this way, which is not the truth. The way I reacted to her going off on her own was completely something I created. And I could have created something different that would have been more effective in my ultimate goal, which was safety. But in the moment, as I reflect back, because I had let my emotions start to take over. And I'm talking about the fear and the worry and those emotions that feel necessary. It feels like scratching that itch that you've just been wanting to scratch all day, but they don't actually create a result that feels better. It's kind of like when you emotionally overeat. Have you ever done that where you eat one Oreo and then you're thinking, oh, I'm going to feel so much better. Oh, I get a little dopamine hit when I eat that sugar. And then you eat another one and another one. And of course you feel worse because the Oreo isn't going to create ultimate satisfaction. It's not going to help you really feel better. It's just a temporary fix. That's what this negative emotional takeover does. It's a temporary fix, but it's not a solution for me. In this case, it wasn't a solution for safety. So here's what I wish I would have done. And here's what I hope you guys can all do when you come up against situations that are surprisingly alarming or frustrating or jarring for you. And let me just tell you this. So the truth is that I own every part of what I did, but owning it doesn't make it right. So what I said to my daughter after I saw her again, how I handled myself, how I reacted, had nothing to do with her. I didn't handle the situation well. When I apologized to Becca, when she came down on the platform before we even got on the train, and I said to her, hey, I am so sorry. That was not okay, the way I reacted. She said, yeah, Mom, that was over the top. I can't believe you threatened to send me home. I didn't even know about the rule. And thankfully, I was in a good place, so I didn't go back into defensive mode. But I have done that in the past, and that's not helpful either. And if you do that, it's okay, but really look at it because that's just another indicator that we're not really ready to talk about it. But in that moment, I was able to say, yeah, it was totally crazy of me, way over the top and not kind or loving at all. And I said to her something like, that's never who I want to be for you. That's never how I want to feel. That's never how I want to react. That was not my best work. And so first, I have to say that I owned it, that I didn't justify it, and that owning it and not justifying it allowed me to apologize for it. I apologized for it from a place of love versus apologizing from a place of shame or from a place of still believing I was right. I've done that, where I apologize from a place that I still believe I'm right. And I think that they need to say sorry too. Like I wanted, there's been times where in the past I would have said to her, I'm so sorry for overreacting. And then I'd want her to say, yeah, and I'm so sorry for going off on my own. But when we apologize because we feel shame or we feel right or we feel like something is wrong with us or we feel like our kids need to take ownership for their part, which by the way, when we apologize because we either feel shame, we feel like something's wrong with us, or we still feel slightly justified in the way we reacted, we're thinking, yeah, you didn't listen to the rules, so therefore I am justified in getting a little upset at you, and we want them to forgive us or to apologize back, which I've done, both of those, which by the way, it's not their responsibility to do either of those things. When we apologize to our kids, we do not want to make it their job to either say they forgive us because we're beating ourselves up and we want that validation from them, or to equally apologize for their part. I'm not saying that we don't want them to see the truth of the part they played in it, but that's not the purpose of the apology. Don't apologize if you can tell part of you is either wanting them to forgive you so that you feel better about yourself or wanting them to take ownership for the part that they played in it. This is not the time or place to do that. Later, but not now. Don't link it to your apology. When you apologize like that, it's an insincere apology. So say sorry because you want to take 100% responsibility and own that that is not who you want to be. When we say sorry in a way that communicates the message, hey, I genuinely love you, and I wish I could have shown up better. I wish I could have done the work ahead of time to not let my nervous system freak out so that I could have come from a place of love when I set that limit, but I didn't. And I am forgiving myself for that. I'm looking honestly at what I did, and I'm going to take responsibility for it. I'm going to take care of it. And I'm so sorry for how I showed up. It was not fair of me to show up that way. That wasn't kind of me. I disagree with the way I showed up, however you want to phrase it. That is coming from a place of clean forgiveness. And that is one of the things I recommend you doing as well as you're evaluating situations that haven't gone well, is to recognize the new skills or old skills, just skills that you're bringing, the connective skills, we'll call it that, the connective skills that you're bringing to the situation that allows you to show up in a way that you would not have been able to in the past. So I brought this clean apology skill to the situation, which was transformational because I didn't need anything from her to be able to apologize and own. And that's what I'm alluding to when I say, even though you might have new situations come up that are unexpected and surprising and lead you to reacting in a way that you are completely confused by, that I was so confused by how I reacted in the train station. I thought, what is happening to me? It felt like a flash from the past that I wasn't wanting to watch this replay. But when that happens, to be able to evaluate it and say, yeah, it was not my best moment, but I brought some new skills. I recovered faster and I turned it around in a way that I wouldn't have. There's so many things that allowed this situation to flip really quick back to normal that if I had done it 15 years ago, wouldn't have happened. Our relationship was super strong. So the trust was there, still have impact and influence. And I was able to look at my mind in a way honestly without beating myself up or needing to make Becca wrong in a way that I wouldn't have been able to 15 years ago. So those are wins, those skills we learn from other situations that are smooth sailing, we bring into rocky situations that help it get back to equilibrium faster. So as I was reflecting back on the situation on the train ride, a couple other things I realized is one, I wanted Becca to read my mind in that moment. And I made the assumption that the rule was clear. And because I had made the assumption that the rule was clear, I was annoyed and let my mind jump to conclusions and thoughts like she's purposely defying me, when really I just hadn't clearly communicated the rule. So then when this situation unfolded, I was really scared, but I was also very annoyed. Now, the reason I was annoyed is because I hadn't taken time to clearly communicate. I hadn't been clear in my expectations. I hadn't laid them out. So it wasn't Becca's fault at all, but she was the one that I directed the frustration towards because I wanted to make it her fault. I hadn't done the work to make sure everybody was clear on the rule. So that was really eye-opening. And if I had laid it out clearly, I hadn't done it in a way my girls heard me, which most likely is because I was activated, I was graspy, I was needy. And when I show up like that, my kids are really good at just tuning me out, which is not a problem. I don't blame them. I tune out people who are activated too, because it's just too much. So I hadn't created clarity around the rule. And even though I want to be really kind, it didn't come out at all in this moment. My default preference is to be able to say whatever's on my mind. I like to say things clearly. I like to say things authentically. I like to not have a filter. So that can be so good in certain areas of my life. It's one of my superpowers, but I also need to be careful when I'm parenting because it can come across in a non-productive way. And especially I need to be careful when I'm feeling negative emotions because that's not a useful fuel for me speaking my mind. It doesn't create good outcome. Unfiltered speak when you're holding space and you're loving someone is so powerful. So I love it when I show up in league with this superpower of mine to speak clearly and without a filter. It's fantastic. Unfiltered speak when you're coming from a place of shame or anger doesn't serve anyone, especially not yourself. So as I was unwinding this, what I needed to do first of all was deal with this foul frustration that was inside of me. The foul frustration I had that fueled the interaction with Becca, but also the residual foul frustration that I had about myself, blaming myself. There was a little bit of that popped up, not a lot. It used to be a lot. I've worked on that really, really hard. And it doesn't matter if yours is a lot of foul frustration or blame or shame toward yourself, or you've worked on it so it's little and not overpowering, but whatever amount that you're feeling, we've got to deal with it. We needed to deal with that first and then find the thought and own that thought first, because the problem was it had gone unsupervised and had led to a lot of chaos. So it's really important because these little pesky, annoying thoughts, if we don't address them, become much bigger problems later. And interestingly enough, my kids had given me feedback previously to this event the prior week saying, hey, Mom, you feel a little anxious. You feel a little annoyed. You feel a little on edge. And instead of being able to self-confront and really look at that, I didn't look at it. I kind of diffused it. I deflected. I avoided it. And that was the feedback that could have led me to be more aware and done the work ahead of time so it didn't escalate to the drama in the train station. When we don't look at those emotions, those pesky thoughts, and they become bigger, what's happening is they're creating a lot of emotion, but we're not feeling them. So more emotion, less feeling. So my thought was, people need to behave differently. And I don't need to tell them over and over again. And they need to read my mind. And when you look at that in hindsight, it makes no sense. I was upset because my child wasn't behaving in the way I thought they should behave. So my thought was, Becca's completely disregarding this rule that's clearly been articulated. Well, as we can see now, it wasn't clearly articulated. And even if it had been clearly articulated and she had disobeyed it, she had dismissed it, the way I responded would not have been helpful. It would not have compelled her to want to listen more. It would have compelled her to want to listen less to me. So a better thought, if she had clearly understood the rule, I had confirmed that she got it, and she still defied it, quote unquote. I don't love that word, but that's where our brains like to go often, is she defied it, she pushed back, she ignored me. The better thought that I try to train my brain to go to is, she wasn't defying me. She's struggling right now. This is the best she can do. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. This behavior is information. If I had thought something like that, I would have looked at the whole situation differently and I would have approached it differently, because then I would be solving for something that is within my control and solvable. Is it information? Is she dysregulated? Is she not understanding the safety issues that I feel? And I would have approached the situation differently. I'm able to access a completely different level of wisdom when I go to a compassionate, connected place, and I can be really kind and gentle with people. And so I want to be able to be direct. I want to be able to tell people the truth. And I also want to be able to direct people from a really kind place. And that's something that I'm working on, especially in situations like this that feel very alarming or unsafe, to be able to hold both emotions. Part of me feels unsafe. Part of me is looking for compassion, looking for understanding, trying to actually do something that will create safety instead of just sit in the alarm. And so I think for me, had I done my work on the situation in general, which was very clear to me, I was having a high level of anxiety, a high level of alarm, I like that word better, frustration, this intensified pursuit, because we were in a new country, language, the phones weren't working very well, so I couldn't always predictably call or track them. If I had done my work on those emotional states and those thoughts, then I would have been able to prepare not only my nervous system, but potentially had a clarifying conversation with all the kids before we started this 12-hour train ride to help me show up in a better place. So one of the reasons I didn't do it was because I was trying to avoid it. I just wanted it to go away. I kept saying how illogical it was that I was feeling so much anxiety, and I just tried to push it aside. And that's the problem that often occurs when we get too in our head, too cognitive about it, because we can see the illogical state of the emotions we're feeling, of the thoughts we're feeling. We're in this state of mind and we realize it's irrational. However, it's there. And we can't just push it aside. It's got to be felt. It's got to be experienced. It's got to be validated and accepted as, hey, this is something that's happening right now. And that's tricky because most of us haven't been taught to do that. And we don't fully appreciate that if we don't do that, it's going to catch up with us. And then it comes to this head when it catches up to us. And now we have this really big problem, right? And I have a lot of work to do and I have repair to do, and all of that's fine. But we just want to use it. And that's totally fine. We just want to use each experience we have where we don't look at these pesky little thoughts and these annoying little emotions head on, and they do culminate into some situation that we're not proud of, to learn, hey, don't ignore it. Don't discount our emotions. Another thing that would be tempting for me to do here is to beat myself up and to say, wouldn't it be better if you were a kinder person? Wouldn't it be better if you were different? But also remember, that won't serve you. That doesn't serve you. That doesn't serve anybody in your life. What I need to say to myself, what I am saying to myself is, when you don't take care of your mind, when you have some gnawing feelings and thoughts that are unaddressed, they're going to catch up with you at some point. That's good to know. So if my thought is, I don't want to deal with this is annoying, then that's my indication. That's my little trigger to pay attention to that thought or emotion. Now, the other thing that I think is really important is paying attention to why I feel the way I do. So I was kind of having this underlying worry about my girls' safety. And I felt like they were pushing boundaries and dismissing my desire for the safety protocol of the buddy system. And I thought in my head that they had said they didn't think it needed to happen. It wasn't important. I don't actually know if they ever said that or if that was something I conjured up in my imagination, but I had this perception that they were pushing back on it. Ironically, after this situation happened, I asked my girls if they were opposed to the buddy system, and they were all completely fine with it. They said, no, it makes total sense. So I was feeling annoyed for no reason. I had a story that I had made up that wasn't reality, that they didn't like my rule, or they thought they were too old or didn't need to have a buddy. And that wasn't even true. So I didn't address this head on. And then close to 2 weeks later, I was in this activated state where I'd harbored all this frustration and annoyance and resentment that they were pushing against a very logical rule in my mind that we needed to stay together. And come to find out they weren't pushing against that rule. And so often that's what's happening. We think our kids don't want to do the chores, or they don't want to do their homework, or they don't want to go to bed. And oftentimes that's just not the case. Even if they say it, that's not really the truth. So in this situation, I didn't do the clarifying work to find out. Last week, I was coaching someone and they said to me, I don't know why I'm feeling this way and I don't know what's going on. I started coaching her and we realized that the reason she wasn't able to access her thoughts to understand why she was feeling this way or why things were going this way was because that thought that we got to at the bottom of it was a thought she didn't want to be having. And in my situation with Becca, my thought was, I'm not handling this very well. I'm not managing this very well. I don't want to be anxious. This is ridiculous that I'm so alarmed and my kids aren't going to get taken and this is silly. And I pushed it away and I didn't want to be having those thoughts. I didn't want to be thinking them. I thought they were irrational. I didn't think they were something worth paying attention to. And so I just pretended I wasn't having them. I didn't want to look at them. And this person I was coaching, this mom I was coaching, she was having thoughts like, I'm not good enough to do this. When you're having a thought like that, whether it's true or not, whether it's logical or illogical, it's in your brain and it's going to have an impact on your life. It's going to create emotions. It's going to create a reaction. And so it's really important that you own these thoughts, even if they make no sense, even if you wish you didn't have them, and pay attention. And that's why it's so important to find your thoughts. Like if you're feeling any kind of aggravation, if you're feeling agitation, I want you to think of it as clutter in the corner of your brain, just like clutter in the corner of your bedroom or your closet. And it's something that you need to acknowledge and you need to address, okay? It's really important that you don't let the clutter build up in your brain. And that irritation that I had been harboring in the corner of my mind, that my girls didn't care about my rules, they didn't care about me, they didn't care I was trying to keep them safe, that they thought I was nagging, that was cluttering up my brain. And it was in the back of my brain. It was very quietly sitting there for a few weeks. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't looked at it. I just let it stew in my brain and I didn't want to see it. So sometimes you have to go looking for clutter. You have to go looking for those little corners of clutter, those little things that are going on. And then you have to allow whatever the thought is that's causing it, allow it to be there. Don't dismiss it. Don't put it away. You have to own it. It makes sense to your nervous system. Even if you don't like it, you have to own it. So my thoughts were, I'm not doing a very good job of making this a great experience for my girls. I'm too anxious. I shouldn't be nervous that they're going to get taken. It's ridiculous. But then also there were thoughts like, my girls don't care about my rules. My girls aren't being considerate of how I'm trying to keep them safe. They're not appreciating all the sacrifices we're making to make this trip happen. But those thoughts were the ones I didn't want to look at. So I saw them, but I brushed them aside and I said to myself, those don't really matter. Who cares? Push away, push away, push away. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Whenever you hear yourself saying that, you probably need to look directly at it because you're going to get yourself into trouble. So what you need to do and what I needed to do was really clean up the clutter in my brain. Had I owned that thought when I saw it, when I first noticed myself trying to push it aside, I would have been able to acknowledge it. I would have been able to say, oh, hey, there's that thought. I'm not managing this very well. Makes sense that I'm having a lot of anxiety. Instead of lashing out at Becca and blaming her for the way I was feeling, I would have been able to handle it much better. So crazy, right? To know that it always comes back to us. But it's also so liberating that it always comes back to us because that means we can always do something about the situations in our life. But had I done the work ahead of time, I could have prevented a lot of drama that I created in my life and my girl's life by handling the situation differently. But I'm not beating myself up for it. I'm just seeing the fallout from something that was the result of an uncleaned up thought about something. So acknowledging the thoughts and looking at them and saying to myself, that's really interesting. Why am I thinking this? Makes sense. And going through that whole process of, in League, we call it peace. We call it daily peace. Every day we're getting to this place of peace, and there's this whole formula. And one of the important steps is this step where we pause after we see what we've done, and we aren't beating ourselves up. Well, we're trying not to. We're learning how not to. That's a lot of my work. And we pause in the middle. I call it the A step. It's an acronym pieces. A for affirm, accept, allow. And we sit in the emotional part of it, the nervous system part of it. And we say, oh, yes, I see why this would make sense to my nervous system. And I totally see why I'm coming, or rather have been coming, still a little bit, but it's getting so much better, have been coming with a little bit of panic and fear about safety. Makes sense. If I look at it from the nervous system's point of view, specifically my sympathetic nervous system's point of view, I like to think of that as part of me. So I want to show up better for my kids. So I want to pay attention to those little sneaky thoughts that will help me communicate better, make sure I'm clear, allow me to feel my emotions, and prevent myself from having an emotional takeover as much as possible. But also, when emotional takeovers happen, because they do, this is why I'm doing this whole episode, they're going to happen, recovering quickly, recovering fast. Okay, so I just want to give you some guidelines here. If you feel any sense of unfinished business with any person, if you feel a slight annoyance, a slight frustration, slight anger that you are ignoring in any area of your life, that is the seed of destruction. Do not underestimate it. Make sure you go there, put your face directly towards it, and clean it up. Make sure that you look at that thought. Don't dismiss it because it's illogical. Don't dismiss it away because you think it's not true. Look at it. See what it is. Hold it as a sentence in your hand. Pay really close attention to it. Notice the feelings that it brings up, and then decide, is this something I want to choose to believe? And why am I believing it? And then own the thought. Don't dismiss it. Own it. And when you own it, then you will have authority of it. Then you can decide whether you want to keep believing it or not. You can say to yourself, I'm not managing this area of my life very well. I feel uneasy. I don't want to look at it. That's your clue to look at it and to ask yourself, what am I thinking? If I had paid more attention to it, I think I could have turned this whole thing around and created a really great result right from the get-go. So if I had seen the thought and I had realized I'm not managing myself very well around safety while we're traveling, what I could say was, oh, hey, this is something to look at. And anytime I wanted to dismiss it, I would say, that's not useful to think that. And it's definitely not useful to try to ignore it. And a thought I could have had is, I'm going to manage this situation head on. That would have felt really good to me. And if I had done that, I would have felt motivated to look at the fear and anxiety and the alarm and the elevated frustration and pursuit that I had weeks before this situation happened, and started to proactively do the work instead of saying, no, this is silly. You shouldn't feel this way. I would have paid attention to those little naggy feelings. I would have paid attention to those little nagging thoughts that I didn't want to think mattered, that I didn't think were important, that I didn't want to be important. They are important and they do matter. So clean them up because it's clutter. It's kind of like that junk drawer you have in your kitchen that continues to catch random clutter. You're like, I don't have time to deal with that. It doesn't really matter. I have more important things to do. But then the drawers get so full that eventually you can't shut it and it keeps nagging you. You keep seeing it out of the corner of your eye and it just keeps bugging you and bugging you and bugging you because it won't shut now. And then something gets dropped in the drawer and now it really won't shut. And no one seems to notice the drawer full of junk in the kitchen that won't close but you. It's kind of like that. And then what happens is you're on the phone and somebody gives you a phone number that's really important. You need to jot down it really quickly. And you go to the junk drawer, try to find a pen and a piece of paper because that's where they're supposed to be. And you can't find a single pen that works and you scream. And you're like, what is the point of the junk drawer if there's no pens? There's no pens in this house. Nobody ever buys pens, and why are the kids putting their junk in here? Well, we don't have to lose our minds because things finally hit the fan. With the junk drawer, I could have just organized it the minute it started to look too full. But if I ignore it, it gets to the point where now I can't find anything in it. Same thing with our minds. We don't have to wait till they're so full that we hit the fan, that we lose our cool, what is another one? We flip our lid. I like that one. Have if you pay attention to the annoyance in the first place and solve it for yourself, then the big situation probably would never have happened. So please don't dismiss anything in your brain as unimportant. Don't distract yourself from it because it can end up being a much bigger problem later. Pay attention to those little pesky, seemingly innocent negative thoughts that are happening in your brain and get them cleaned up because ultimately they could show up and cause you big problems later. So find your thoughts, let them be where they are, don't judge them, hold space for them, and then own them. And once you own them, you can decide what you want to do with them. Okay, you all, that brings me to the end of my sad story of losing my cool in the Berlin train station, drama at the train station, and of me breaking down how I mismanaged my thoughts and sharing the whole experience with you of what I could have done to avoid the entire situation. It's kind of embarrassing, but also kind of real. Not kind of real, very real. I wanted to lay it all out and show you my humanness, and that is my goal, is humanness over unattainable perfection anyway. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, let me know. Also, if you're liking the podcast and have a second and could leave a review, that would be amazing. That helps get the word out of Connect Method Parenting to more people. And if you're wanting help implementing Connect Method Parenting in real life so your kids want to listen to you, remember you can still apply for the final round of the pivot this year at cmp.works/pivot. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. Applications close in just a couple of days on October 5th. Love to see you in there. What a fun, real episode to celebrate the 1-year birthday of the Connect Method Parenting podcast. Thank you so much for being here. All right, everybody, have an amazing rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon. And for those of you starting the pivot on Monday, I'm so excited to get to work on helping you change your parenting from a corrective to a connective place. It feels so good. It's doable. We're going to lay it all out. Can't wait to see you in there. Learning how to connect method parenting is the best work you'll ever do. All right, y'all. We'll talk to you later. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, you're going to want to check out the 8-week parenting pivot, which is the first phase of my program, the League of Extraordinarily Connected Parents. We're opening up a new round in October. So if you're listening to this live, it's going to be October 7th. If you're listening to this and that date has passed, go check out the website, connectmethodparenting.com, and we'll list the next time we're opening. But if you're listening to this live, go check it out because you can already apply and get accepted into the next round so that you can lock yourself in place to have a huge shift with your kids, to get them to want to listen to you, which is very different than using punishments, rewards, timeouts, ultimatums to get them to listen to you. We want it to be more cooperative. We want better listening. We want a great relationship, and we want to have a ton of fun when we're parenting. So if that's what you want, if what I talked about in this episode resonated, jump over to cmp.works/pivot. I'll put the link in the show notes as well, and find out more about the pivot, apply to join, and we'll let you know if you get in. All right. Until next time, go connect with your kids, have a blast, and pop back in for another episode soon about how to use connection, not correction, to get your kids to want to listen to you. See you later. Bye.